as we know, Christmas is a time for gathering round the fire and telling stories. If you haven't got a fire, gather round the radiator. If you haven't got a radiator, gather round a torch. If you haven't got a torch, gather round an extra strong mint. Now, this time of year, when the nights are dark and endless, I reckon a scary story goes down best. Alison Moore's novel, The Lighthouse, was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize in 2012, and a collection of stories, The Pre-War House, came out this year. And when critics describe her work, they use words like bleak and ominous and unsettling, but I'd add touching and moving and empathetic, because no matter what trials she puts her characters through, she never lets us lose sight of their fundamental humanity and, by extension, ours. Alison has written a ghost story for a new collection called The Longest Night, called Winter Closing. So gather round the radiator, unless your pants are dry on it, of course. So, Alison, we're going to hear an extract from the story. So could you set the scene for us in a kind of scary way?
OK, Winter Closing is set in an old house in which a writer used to live, and now a tour guide called Derek is leading a group of ladies around the house for the last tour of the season as we head into winter. And I'm going to start where the tour party has just left.
Right.
Sandra follows Derek into the kitchen, where he switches on the kettle, takes coffee powder and milk powder out of the cupboard, and makes them both a cup of coffee. Sandra's in the mug she brings with her from home and takes away again at the end of the day, and his in one of the cups that belongs to the house. Sandra will not sit in Mary's chair, and so she stands, complaining again about the cold, and Derek says, "You get used to it." He does not expect, though, that she will stay long enough to get used to it. None of them stays for long. Derek, on the other hand, will never leave. It does get cold, he agrees, but no wonder a big old house like this, with its bare floorboards and single glazing. "And the ghost," says Sandra, testing the heat of her coffee. Derek looks at Sandra in surprise. "There isn't a ghost," he says. "We say there's a ghost because that's what they want to hear. It's what they pay for." Sandra frowns and drinks her coffee quickly, rinses and dries her mug, and puts it in her handbag. "It's getting dark," she says, reaching for her cagoule. "Your wife will be wondering where you are." "I'm not married," says Derek, taking the other cagoule down from its peg, "but the dog will be waiting for his walk." They go together down the corridor and into the entrance hall. Derek holds the front door open, but Sandra has stopped at the foot of the stairs. "You go," she says. "I'm just going to nip to the toilet. Have a nice Christmas." "You too," says Derek, stepping outside. As he pulls the door to behind him, he hears Sandra singing so that she won't be frightened. He feeds his arm into the sleeve of his cagoule. It is awkwardly tight, too many jumpers, he thinks, and is on the path when he remembers his bag of dog food and the Christmas card he meant to give to Sandra. He goes back inside, back across the entrance hall, back down the corridor and into the gloomy kitchen. Gathering up his things, he pauses to say, "Merry Christmas, Mary." A distant door opens or closes. Hearing Sandra singing, Derek hurries to catch her. By the time he comes into the entrance hall, though, she has gone. She has locked the front door behind her. It is only when Derek puts his hand into his pocket for his keys and instead finds a tissue that he realises he is wearing Sandra's cagoule. He sees briefly through the window in the door Sandra at the end of the garden path, walking away in his cagoule with his keys in the pocket. He knocks on the glass and then bangs with his fist on the door, but Sandra is already through the garden gate, lost behind the high hedge. "Damn it," he says to himself.
Thank you very much, Alison. I think without giving too much away, we can reveal that life might get a bit more difficult for Derek as the story progresses. But once a story like that sets in motion, it's almost like a little machine. And somehow you, as the writer, must keep the reader rooting for Derek, hoping that it'll be all right in the face of the obvious, don't you?
Yes, I think we very much feel the story through Derek. And We also, we all know the mechanics of a ghost story. The stories we've written in this anthology come from the tradition of ghost stories, even though they're in a contemporary setting. So, you know, for example, that if he goes into a room on his own and the door slams behind him, you're at that sort of point in the story.
But you want to, as a reader, you're going, come on, Derek, just don't go through that door. And you think, please go through there, Derek. And yet somehow we sense that something's going to happen. But as the writer, you must keep us involved and make us hope that somehow he can hear us telling him not to do it.
Yes, and I have throughout, of course, had to think of all the ways in which he could get out of the house. And I've had to put obstacles in poor Derek's way. And there are, of course, things like phones. So if we've got a contemporary setting, how can he not phone for help? How can he not call for help when he's in a village? And that helped, thinking about answers to these things, helped to drive the story forward. When
you're writing a story like this, that's a kind of genre piece, did you start with the end of it? Did you start from the end and work back from there?
Not with this one, no. I knew who Derek... I had a feel for the kind of character Derek was, what his role was, and what the house was about, and what Mary was like. Mary's the writer. But with this particular story, some stories I write quite quickly, in a day or two, but this one took a very long time. I had trouble finding the ending, and I wrote it in a number of different ways, including with a number of different endings before I found the right ending.
Would there be an ending that we could call ending X, where it all ended happy for Derek?
No, that was never one of the endings.
Poor old Derek. Now there's a lot of cold in this story, and cold is scary to start with. And I wonder how you write cold. There's that line from the start of the story where it goes, excusing herself, she gets up from behind the desk to go and close the front door, shutting out the wind, if not the cold. And that's so good because she shuts the door, so the wind's not coming in, but it's still cold inside. And suddenly that word cold on its own at the end of the line is almost enough. And I just wonder how you managed to write the variations on cold that keeps the story chilly all the way through.
Whilst I changed the ending a lot, the start remained as it was in every draft. So there was that frost on the lawn and the brittle trees. So I always knew that the house was surrounded by cold, and obviously you're in a cold season as well.
It's funny because we mentioned that if this was set in the 19th century, it would be easier in a way because you couldn't have the contemporary things like the phone, and you get around that very well. And we sat here at the top floor of Media City, and it's dark outside, and yet there's all these lights. And I wonder how, in a lit setting like this, can we talk about why we still like ghost stories at Christmas? I
think where we have these festivals of lights, which of course isn't just Christmas, you've got the pagan predecessor and Diwali, we have these festivals of lights at the dark time of year when the nights are long and dark and the winter's long and dark. And I think what's going on for a writer is that you want to look back at the darkness and look at what it might be that you're trying to distract yourself from.
Poor old Derek. I keep thinking about Derek, and I want to apologise to any Dereks in the room or Dereks listening at home, but if you just altered one letter in his name, he'd become Dirk. And he'd be more forceful. I think he'd escape. In other words, Derek in a ghost story is always going to end up a kind of victim, I think. A bit like a Trevor.
It's true. I choose my names with care. They do always tell me something about the character. Yes, he is a cardiganed man. He has many jumpers on.
Apologies, other names are available. Thank you very much to Alison Moore. And The Longest Night is available from Curious Tales, and Alison's books are published by Salt. Condiments of the season. Alison.